This screencast is to support the teaching of this lesson, which is lesson 2C from the book Straightforward Pre-Intermediate. The author is Philip Kerr, Kerr, and that is Macmillan. Okay, so that's the full reference. Here's the student's book page, and you're also going to need two other things. Here's the teacher's book page. There are 3 pages of this. There's actually some really great detail in here, and it's really informative about how to use timelines and things like that. So even if you're not teaching this lesson, I think this is a really good teacher's book page to look at for methodology. And here's the grammar reference, the language reference, which comes from the student's book. It's great to see what level of detail you need to go into at a pre-intermediate level for this grammar. It covers all of the lessons from Unit 2, including the past simple, but today, this lesson that we're going to look at focuses on the past continuous. There's a very nice little timeline here, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Let's have a look at the materials. So the teacher's book's got a nice idea for a lead in here, and it's also a way of pre-teaching the keyword for the lesson, which is embarrassing. So get ready for that. They suggest telling a little personal story about an embarrassing incident and trying to elicit the word embarrassing and then checking the meaning. And I think that's a great way to start. So you can start off with a personal story, perhaps show a picture or a series of pictures about other people, whatever you think might elicit the word embarrassing. And then down here, they've actually got some really good questions to check that they understand the meaning. So concept checking questions, really leading the students to fully understand the concept of the word. I feel there's too many here. There are a lot of them, and if you use too many CCQs, it can lead to confusion. So I'd probably try and pare it down to 2 or 3 simple CCQs, and you can pull them from this part of the teacher's book notes. Very useful. So moving back to the student's book here, this is a very nice exercise, exercise 1, different embarrassing situations. I would put these on a slide or on a handout, depending if you're in the classroom or online, and then ask the students to decide which one is the most embarrassing. So give them time, give them a time limit, maybe 2 minutes, to have a look at each of them and decide which one is the most embarrassing, and maybe which one is the least embarrassing, if you like. Okay? And then you can get the students to share their ideas, ask them why they think that, try to get a bit of discussion going and warm the students up to the topic. So we've got a reading task coming up. So let's take a bit of a time to look at the stages of a reading lesson and review those. Now remember, you want to start by raising interest. We've already talked about embarrassing situations. Great. And then you want to set the context for the reading, which is that these items here, the 3 pieces of reading, are from a teacher's blog. So you could just say, this is what teachers have to say about some embarrassing things that have happened to them. We would need to pre-teach any blocking vocabulary. So what do I mean by blocking vocabulary? I mean words that will stop them from having an overall understanding of the gist of the text, and words that will stop them from being able to do the tasks. So often a good procedure here that I like to do is actually I try and do the tasks myself. So that might be this task here, the first task, which is reading for gist, I would suggest. And then the other task is over here, exercise 3, reading for more specific information and or detail. So if I try to do those tasks myself, I can work out which are the blocking words. Also, the teacher's book does give you a heads up on what words they think need pre-teaching as well. I think that the ones that need pre-teaching are Halloween, costume, witch, as in, pointy hat, exam, ringtone, and the word ages. I think that will really help. Now, I'm just focusing on the first 2 texts here because I think all 3 might be a little bit tough for the students, particularly online where they're looking at these texts on screen. So if you wanted to teach all 3 of the texts, you'd need to look at this one here, and decide which words might need pre-teaching and add them to the list. So we've chosen some words to pre-teach, maximum of 6, I would say, in any reading lesson, and just decide how you're going to do it. One way would be to use pictures and try to elicit the words, or give situations and try to elicit the words, much as we did with the word embarrassing. Another way to do it is to make a matching task where you have the words down one side, definitions and or pictures mixed up on the other side of the handout or slide. You show those to the students and they try to match them up. So you're finding out which words they know and which words they don't. Then you can clarify and check the answers. You might need some CCQs. For example, the word ages, if they've matched it to a long time, you might be able to ask a concept checking question like, so do you think 2 minutes is ages? What about an hour? Is that ages? Yeah. Is it a positive thing or a negative thing if you wait for ages? Okay, so some concept checking might be necessary. You might want to drill them if they're useful, or they might use them later in the lesson, then drill them. But otherwise, they're just here to support the reading text, really. So we've set the context and we've pre-taught some vocabulary. Students are now ready to read. So here's the first task. Give them the book. Yeah, that looks like a pretty good starter for an easy reading task that will focus on understanding gist. Now, as I've said, I'm just going to focus on the first 2 texts in this time. So I would set the task first. Always set the task before the students read. It gives them a purpose and a reason for reading, and that will help to develop the skill we're trying to develop, which is reading for gist. So my rule of thumb for a reading for gist is I read it to myself at a reasonable speed, and then I double that time for the students. So I might say to the students, okay, I want you to read the 2 different texts and match them to some of the situations from exercise 1. And then give them a time limit for that, whatever it might be, 2 minutes or whatever. In the online situation, you're going to have to think about what they can see. They haven't got the embarrassing situations in front of them anymore, so you might need to snip and cut and paste those and put them in the chat so they can see those alongside the reading text themselves. Okay, so talk to your tutor, Donna or I, about how you can manage to do that and make that visible for everybody. So students read, and then get them to check in pairs if you're in the classroom what their answer is, or in the online environment I would say, right, everybody talk, I will listen, what are your answers, and just listen in and then come in and clarify the answers, and then it'll be time for a more demanding reading task. Alright, so a more demanding reading task here looks pretty good. Remember, if you're only doing the first 2 texts, to take out the questions that relate to the third one. Set the task before they read, give them time to read and a bit of silence in order to do so, and then give them a time check. You might say 1 minute left, something like that, and say, you know, I'm here, you can ask me any questions if there's any words you need to know, and otherwise give them some space. Then at the end, again, you can get them to check in pairs. If you're in a classroom or in the online situation, I would say talk together, I'll listen, and you can listen in and see where the problem areas lie. And then a nice clear feedback session, nominating students, checking whether others agree with them, and then giving a visual of the answers, not just doing it orally, okay? And again, the practicalities of reading and looking at the task at the same time are going to have to be dealt with in the online situation. And you can round off the reading nicely by looking at exercise 4. Students might have said a few things earlier on in the lesson, but why not bring in a few there, or show them a picture and they could say what they think the embarrassing situations are. Okay, just to round off the reading before we move into the grammar stage. Alright, so here's our grammar, the past continuous. Alright, so here's all the information in the box, but what we want to do is to make this more engaging for the students, to draw them into it. Just reading it is not going to do that. We need to guide them through. I would suggest, first of all, just putting some straightforward positive sentences from the text on a slide and trying to elicit from the students what the meaning is. Okay, so asking them guiding questions, saying, okay, so maybe one of them is, I was working at a school in Cambridge. Okay, you might say, do you think that was a long action or a short action? You might say, did it happen now or in the past? And that's probably all you need. Yep, I wouldn't use the words in progress. I think that can be quite confusing for students at this level, but happening or the word that it's a longer action are useful. So have some positive sentences up there, and then maybe try to elicit what the negative would be and what the question form would be. Okay, here you've got a question and then you've got what we call the short answers. Yes, she was, no, she wasn't. We're not going to need this in the later stages of the practice today. So I think all you need to cover is the positive. You've got an example here. Elicit the negative and then this form of the question. Okay, so start off with the meaning, guiding them with the meaning. Perhaps use a timeline. Here, back in the teacher's book, there's a great little section on timelines. It's really helpful and really helps you to guide the students to it as well. So have a good look at that. So the other thing to cover is here, okay, the idea that we use the past continuous for the longer actions that are interrupted by a shorter action. I would put up this sentence without the word when, try to elicit from the students what goes in this gap, and then I would try to guide them to the meaning. So asking questions, which is the longer action, walk or rang, and then show a timeline so they can make that comparison between the two forms as well. Pronunciation wise, you could deal with the weak forms like I was working, was not I was working, where were you working, where were you working. The weak forms rather of was and were, so drilling some of that would be really useful for the students. We want to move to practice now. We've got a lovely gap fill here, but I feel something is missing. We need something in the middle. So I'd probably put up some correct or not correct sentences and get the students to correct them, just to make sure they've got a real grip on the form and the meaning. And then on to the gap fill, which is lovely. Do the first one together with as an example, and then give the students time to read, think, and write their answers down. Get them to talk together or check in pairs before feedback so that you can hear what they have to say, and then visual feedback, oral feedback. They will get lost, it will happen, so make it visual. So some more challenging practice. It's time to move on to that now. I'm not going to cover exercise 2. I think I'd move straight to exercise 3. I think first thing to do would be to try to elicit the question, what were you doing ago? And then to drill that, and then to model the task by putting up these different time things on a slide and getting the students to ask you the question, what were you doing 15 minutes ago, what were you doing 1 hour ago, and then you model the answers. Okay, then you can say, right, now I want you to do exactly the same thing in small groups and put them into breakout rooms or small groups to do that, to ask and answer the questions. There's a few ways of extending on from here. You could get them to write down 4 sentences in answer to the questions, 3 true, 1 false, and then they say their sentences and everybody has to guess which one is the false one. It needs a good clear model from you. And there's another idea in the teacher's book which I quite like as well, which is to do the task personally and then to imagine yourself in a different role. So you are an airline pilot, you are Boris Johnson, good Lord, you are Donald Trump, something like that, something that your students might be able to relate to, and then ask and answer the questions from that point of view. Just add more oral practice and a bit of fun at the end there. Make sure you include any correction at the end of the activity. You could do a little bit on the spot, but maybe some more at the end to cover any typical problems. And then that's it. You're ready to go and have a nice cup of tea. Okay.